afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's June the 20th, 171st day of the year. 194 days remain to the year's over. Holidays and drills. National Take Your Dog to Work Day. National Vanilla Milkshake Day. Flag Day in Argentina. Tariki. For those not familiar with that, there's a special time in New Zealand. And the night sky lights up with the Pleiades. Stars. World Productivity Day. National Ice Cream Soda Day. American Eagle Day. National Tennis Day. National Take Back the Lunch Break Day. National Food Aman Day. It's a pastry-like cake made with cinnamon butter, and it's incredibly delicious and probably fattening. National Seashell Day. National Soluna Light Therapy Day. National West Virginia Day. Ugliest Dog Day. Anne and Samantha Day. For those not familiar with that, we've got Samantha Smith, American schoolgirl, reached out to Soviet leader Yuri Andropov during the Cold War. And then we have Anne Frank, a Jewish teenager, who was eventually killed by the Nazis. National Hike with a Geek Day. World Car Recycling Day. International Nystagmus Awareness Day. World Refugee Day. We got plenty of those here. Summer solstice. It's the day you're supposed to change your sheets, you know. It's also the longest day of the year. Waste and Recycling Workers Week. National Play Catch Week. Learning Disability Week. Rainforest World Music Festival. Animal Rights Awareness Week. Refugee Week. Bees Knees Week. Famous people, Nicole Kidman, John Goodman, and Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier from World War II. All right, let's see what we have in the way of the news. FBI increases surveillance on Iran-backed operatives in the U.S. And Israel carries out strikes in Tehran as the defense minister sends warning to Iranian proxies. Donald Trump is expected to make a decision on U.S. involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict within the next 2 weeks. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz sent a warning to Iran-backed terror organization Hezbollah. Watch your step, folks. IDF said it hit military-industrial sites in Tehran during a series of overnight strikes. Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, Israel, took a direct hit from an Iranian ballistic missile this morning, on Thursday morning there. Israel's foreign minister condemned Iran's attack on the medical center as a war crime. Democratic narrative on the key aspect of Trump's budget bill is been absolutely shattered by an expert, been called outlandish, no basis in reality. But that's typical of the Democrats. They pretty much admit they don't have a program other than interfering with President Trump. Well, Iran Middle East move by Trump have a hidden, brilliant strategy. Minnesota shooting timeline. The suspect has been captured named Vance Belters. He tried to hunt down some more lawmakers. Vance Luther Belcher, 57, captured in Sibley County after a 2-day manhunt. Shot 2 state lawmakers and their spouses. Killed 2 on Saturday morning. He's accused of killing former Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman, a Democrat, and her husband Mark, early on Saturday at their Brooklyn Park home in Minneapolis. Then he shot State Senator John Hoffman, also a Democrat, and his wife Yvette at their nearby Chamberlain home in a related attack. The County Sheriff's Office told Fox News Walter verbally identified himself to authorities searching for him in the area on Sunday evening. He's been called the face of evil. Pretended to be a police officer to get the people to open their doors. Well, Newsom is still trying to stop Trump from nationalizing the National Guard in California, but Trump just scored another major win against Newsom. Newsom would be happy to be Deputy Ayatollah, I suspect. Anything to oppose Trump. Well, Captain Cook's legendary ship, identified near New England resort after 250 years. It's resting in 40 feet of water near Newport. There's a grieving daughter who put her mother's ashes in a bottle so she could finally see the world. Not long after that, a stranger found the bottle, and her message to the woman's daughter went viral. That woman never got a chance to travel the globe, so her family decided to remedy that after her death. Getting back to Captain Cook's ship, it was the HMS Endeavour. Billionaire Telegram CEO plans to divide his wealth among more than 100 children. He said through his sperm clinic, he had fathered more than 100 babies. His name is Pavel Durov. The shark expert has said that shark behavior is shifting. The beaches with most shark attacks as Americans pay tribute to Jaws and the number of shark activists to lead in. On Tuesday, a swimmer was bitten on the leg while in South Carolina. Mr. Hilton had a 9-year-old girl who was snorkeling off Boca Grande, Florida, was bitten. There have been 47 unprovoked shark bites in 2024, with 28 taking place in the U.S. Florida beaches have logged the highest number of shark attacks, 942 unprovoked bites since 1837. Hawaii had 199, California had 141. Activist Julie Anderson, founder of the New York-based Shark Angels, told Fox News that recent attacks have indicated an increase in sharks in the ocean. The rise in sighting is due to a mixture of factors: more people in the water, better technology, shifting ocean conditions, and in some cases, successful conservation. WWE legend makes a bold Blake Monroe prediction after NXT arrival. She made her NXT debut earlier this month. WWE is doing a lot of free agent signings. She was known originally as Mariah May. Name for herself and stardom, and was a women's champion in All Elite Wrestling. In her time with a few storm. And Americans face different retirement costs across the states as Social Security cuts are looming. Hawaii tops the list, requiring $3.7 million for a comfortable retirement. West Virginia would just need $1.3 million. Retirement is on the top of the mind of many Americans, whether they're approaching their so-called golden years or still have a lot of years to work. A study released this week by Global Banking Rates calculated the amount of money that a comfortable retirement would require without income from Social Security factored in, and associated with the expenses a retiree face in each U.S. state. Nearly half of Generation X is not confident about retirement. And of course, as I said, Hawaii tops the list where it requires the most money to retire. Former college basketball player was alleged to be a drug mule takes the stand in the Diddy's trial. He's got an immunity deal. Former Syracuse basketball player Brendan Paul becomes the fifth witness granted immunity in Diddy's sex trafficking case. Yeah, but pulling on all the stops to get him. Let's see. Life-yielding illegal migrant accused of threatening the U.S. attorney on all New York streets. John Sarcone III, U.S. attorney for the Northern District of New York, said he feared for his life during an alleged attack by an illegal alien. This man previously been deported, has a long rap sheet, and arrested on attempted murder charges in Albany after he pulled out a knife and lunged at the U.S. attorney for the Northern District. Saul Morales Garcia, 40, resident from El Salvador, charged at the U.S. attorney Tuesday night while he was outside a hotel. Sarcone had been appointed by Attorney General Pam Bondi in March, said he feared for his life. I don't know why the Democrats continue to try to protect these Looney Tunes. Florida Attorney General is defiant after he got a contempt charge for enforcing immigration law. And one of God's anointed decided that his word was more important than the law. Bernie Sanders is at it again, claims Netanyahu is wrong on Iran as Trump weighs military intervention. Trump's bill currently in front of Congress includes gun deregulation. Democrats are having a meltdown. They're vowing to fight it tooth and nail. Bill Gates reveals the next phase of the Alzheimer's fight as he shares his father's personal battle. He has optimism about blood-based diagnostic tests after losing his father to Alzheimer's. Weight training, it says, among older adults with cognitive impairment seems to have some benefit. But when in doubt, diagnose the need for weight training. Let's see. We have, well, that ends our news segment. We'll be talking today about more UFO encounters. One that I've always been fascinated by took place in São Francisco de Salas, Brazil, October 1957. It's the Antonio Villas-Boas encounter, which is a very, very well-known UFO encounter. As I say, it took place in Brazil. And you have no idea how thick and heavy the night can be in South America until you find yourself sitting in the jungle, spending that night listening to creatures wandering through the brush. Well, in this particular story, it was in Brazil. It was night, and the night was thick and heavy over the farmlands of São Francisco de Salas. Antonio Villas-Boas was a 23-year-old farmer. He was doing what countless farmers had done before him, working his fields at night. Because during the day, it can get hot enough that you can literally fry an egg on the sidewalk, assuming you're on the sidewalk. So a lot of farmers work at night. But this particular night would become extraordinary. Launch a narrative that would reshape humanity's understanding of UFO encounters and inaugurate the era of alien abduction stories. Now, the whole thing began innocuously enough. October 5th, he's trying to sleep and he noticed something unusual. Fluorescent silver light illuminating the farmyard. Didn't have any particular visible source that he could determine. Opened his window to get a better look. The light seemed to respond, moving toward him, before filtering through the shutters and roof tiles, then it vanished. 9 days later, it came back. This time he was plowing with his brother when he spotted a large round light hovering about 100 meters in the air. The light was so bright it hurt their eyes. And it played cat and mouse with the young farmer, retreating each time they approached him before it finally disappeared as though it had been turned off. But it was the third encounter that gave rise to the mystery of the stories. This was the early hours of October 15th. And it would earn Antonio Villas-Boas a permanent place in UFO history. About 1 o'clock in the morning, and he noticed what appeared to be a red star growing rapidly larger, descending from the clear night sky. And the object that emerged from the darkness was like nothing he'd ever seen before. Elongated egg shape, surrounded by small purple lights. Little spikes protruding from its front and a rotating dome that changed color as the craft landed. And what followed was an encounter so bizarre, so intimate, so disturbing that it would have seemed absurd had it not preceded elements that become commonplace in later abduction accounts. Although there had been previous abductions, they didn't get the type of play that this one did. 4 humanoid figures in gray suits came out of the darkness and seized the young man. Their helmets revealed only light blue eyes through round holes. And despite his struggles, they picked him up and carried him on board their craft, took him up a flexible ladder that swung beneath their weight. The interior of the craft was entirely metal, illuminated by square lights set into the walls and the ceilings. The beings communicated with each other, what Antonio Villas-Boas described as slow barks and yelps. While subjecting him to a series of procedures that become really familiar to UFO researchers decades later. They stripped him, they applied an unknown substance to his skin, they took blood samples. It was what happened next that made this case special. naked alien woman entered the room where he was being held. And he said she was beautiful and strange. White skin with black, platinum blonde hair, blood red body hair. Unusual facial features included elongated blue eyes that slanted downward. And what followed was an intimate encounter that left him convinced he was being used in some kind of breathing experiment, especially when she pointed to her belly and into him and into the sky before leaving the room. Well, at that point, they finally allowed him to leave. During the examination that followed his experience, Dr. Olavo Fontes observed physical evidence that something extraordinary had in fact happened. Dark marks remained on his chin where blood had been drawn. Purple patches appeared spontaneously in his arms and legs in the days after the encounter. And the symptoms he experienced, nausea, headaches, lethargy, and burning eyes, led Fontes to suspect he'd been exposed to radiation. But by the time Fontes got around to doing this test, it had been too much time passed. Well, the world in 1957 wasn't really ready for the V.S. Bullis story. A group of the U.S. Air Force stated just a year before that all reports of UFO landings and enemy contact are automatically marked for crackpot. And V.S. Bullis reached out to Al Martins, a journalist known for covering Brazilian UFO cases. Even Martins was skeptical. He declined to publish the account, and on Cruzeiro magazine, due to lack of evidence and lack of corroborated cases. But history would actually validate many elements of his account. 4 years later, Betty and Barney Hill's abduction experience in New Hampshire would show remarkable similarities. They show UFO sighting, the humanoid beings, the medical examination, and even the theme of reproduction. Betty Hill was actually subjected to a pregnancy test. In the 1980s and 90s, researchers like Dr. John Mack, I had the opportunity to meet, Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs would document hundreds of cases featuring similar details. Now, some saw darker implications in the V.S. Bullis case. In 1978, former CIA operative Bosko Velokovic claimed the entire incident was a psychological warfare experiment conducted under Project MKUltra, complete with drug-induced hallucinations. Now, while declassified documents did confirm the CIA conducted such experiments, Velokovic offered absolutely no proof about his claims. Others, like religious scholar Jeffrey Kripal, noted striking similarities between modern abduction accounts and ancient religious traditions. The Tantric Yoga tradition describes bodies of light with flying temples containing female beings that would abduct and seduce their victims. Medieval Christian and Islamic scholars debated whether humans could breed with supernatural beings. According to these scholars, V.S. Bullis had encountered something that humans have been experiencing and attempted to explain for millennia. Well, as for V.S. Bullis, he went on to live his life, became a lawyer and a father, rarely talked about his experience, even to his family, but maintained that it actually happened until he died in 1991. And this story stands as a watershed moment in UFO history. The first modern abduction account to suggest that whatever intelligence might be visiting the Earth has far more intimate interest. Interest that might be considered disturbing. Far more involvement than just observing. But today, the fields near San Francisco de Solis continue to be worked into the night sky. The same stars that shone down in Antonio V.S. Bullis that October night in 1957. And maybe somewhere in these fields there remains some trace of the extraordinary events that transformed a young Brazilian farmer into an unwitting pioneer in humanity's ongoing effort to understand its place in the universe. It seems increasingly strange and increasingly populated each passing year. It should be pointed out that the Brazilian military did capture radar sightings that showed something came down. Neighbors saw something hovering over the Esforços fields. So did aliens come down and rape a Brazilian farmer? Does he have a hybrid child somewhere in the realms of space? We'll probably never know. Well, from Brazil, let's go to Texas. November 2nd, 1957. The Leveland UFO case. Now, on this particular evening, a peculiar mist hung in the air over Hockley County, Texas. In those days, it was Highway 116. Today, it's Highway 114. Stretched like an infinite black ribbon across the plains, its asphalt surface glistening faintly under the cloudy night sky. The residents of Leveland, by way of knowing that their small farming community was about to become the epicenter of the most compelling and well-documented UFO incidents in American history. The star of the show, so to speak, was Pedro Salcido, a 30-year-old farm worker. He was the first to encounter something inexplicable that night. He was with his friend Joe Salas. Got in his truck along that empty highway 4 miles west of Lebanon. The clock had just struck 11 when an extraordinary night transformed him into something unbelievable. The truck started shaking real hard, Salcido later recalled. His voice still carries traces of bewilderment even the years after the incident. Around lumbering like thunder, but different. What followed next was set the pattern for a series of encounters that would unfold over the next 2.5 hours. Encounters that would baffle law enforcement and eventually draw the attention of the U.S. Air Force. And the object that appeared in front of Salcido's truck defied explanation and description. It hovered above the road, a massive presence that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Later be described it as an egg-shaped, others said torpedo-shaped. All agreed on its impossible brilliance. A light that shifted from orange to blue to green with an intensity that made direct observation almost unbearable. And more remarkable than its appearance was its effect on Salcido's vehicle. As the object got close, the truck's engine died without warning. Headlights flickered and went out. Salcido and Salas found themselves stranded on the empty highway, their modern machinery rendered useless by whatever force emanating from that mysterious craft. Salcido later said, "I got out in front of the truck and you could feel the heat hit you." He said, "I hit the ground and dust was flying everywhere." And he looked over at his friend, also appeared to be in a state of shock. Kind of motionless with wide, unblinking eyes. Salcido said he had to shout at him, "Wake up!" and then shake him. Salas finally responded. His first words were, "What is it?" Well, that is the main question. What was it indeed? As the night wore on, that question would be repeated by an increasing number of witnesses across Hockley County. Jim Wheeler encountered what he described as a large egg-shaped object sitting directly in the middle of the road north of Lebanon. And his car, like Salcido's truck, stalled in as soon as he got close to it. Texas Tech freshman Noah Wright, driving toward Lebanon around midnight, reported a brilliant ball of light that killed his engine and lights. James Long, a truck driver from Waco, saw a oval-shaped object in Oklahoma Flats Road that rose into the air with a thunderous roar when he approached it to investigate. And as you might imagine, the police switchboard in level 1 lit up with calls. By the end of the night, 15 separate reports described similar encounters of brilliant otherworldly objects, vehicles, mysteriously lost power. Only that function normally was whatever it was left. Even Hopkins County Sheriff Ware Clem was a witness. He observed a bright oval-shaped light about 300 yards ahead of his patrol car while investigating the reports. The incidents carried a weight of credibility that set them apart from your typical UFO reports of that time. These were not isolated sightings by singular witnesses. There were multiple independent reports from different locations, all describing similar objects and effects, and all with a concentrated timeline. Witnesses were largely working people, truck drivers, farmers, students. No apparent reason to fabricate such a bizarre tale. When the Air Force, compelled by the volume and consistency of the reports, dispatched the investigator to level 1 2 days later. Of the 7 witnesses who reported vehicle interference, the investigator interviewed 3. And the official explanation, as you might guess, suggested several different natural phenomena. St. Elmo's fire, an electrical discharge in the atmosphere, reflections of burning gas from low cloud cover, or ball lightning, extremely rare weather phenomena. Yet these explanations seemed inadequate to a lot of folks, including Dr. Eric Bruning, Texas Tech professor who studied storm electrification. And while he did acknowledge ball lightning could potentially affect vehicles' electrical systems, he noted the reported size of the level of an object described by some witnesses as being 200 feet long far exceeded any known instance of ball lightning, which typically appear no larger than a few feet in diameter. One sightings occurred at a pivotal moment in American history, when the country's relationship with the unknown has been transformed by the space age. Just a month after these incidents, the Soviet Union would launch Sputnik 2, intensifying Cold War anxieties and speculation about what might be possible in the vast reaches of Earth's atmosphere. 60 years later, the events of that November night continue to resist definitive explanation. Were the lights a natural phenomenon like it understood the science? Classified government aircraft being tested in the Texas night? Or even something more extraordinary? The question at first left Pedro Salcido and Joe Salas standing shocked outside their stall truck continues to be asked today. What was it? Well, what remains beyond dispute is that the impact of the incident had on those who experienced it. The night the lights came to level them marked a moment when the ordinary rules of reality seemed to bend, when the reliable technology of the modern world temporarily failed, when multiple national and rational observers were forced to confront something that defied conventional explanation. More than the decades that followed, their testimony has stood as a reminder, even in the age of scientific certainty, mystery persists. Sometimes it appears suddenly on a dark highway, made in impossible light. Well, I made mention earlier of Betty and Barney Hill. That happened in New Hampshire, September 19, 1961. Well, the first hint of autumn had settled over the New Hampshire White Mountains. Though the night was unseasonably warm, Betty and Barney Hill drove in silence along Route 3. Joshua and Delcy dozing in the back seat. Just past 10:30 in the evening, and the couple was eager to reach their Portsmouth home after an impromptu vacation to Canada. They'd heard words about an approaching hurricane, so that caused them to cut their trip short. They had to make it back home at 3 in the morning. Betty, who was a 41-year-old social worker known for her pragmatic nature, noticed it first. Bright light in the southwest sky. over here, what she took to be Jupiter. Her initial thought was a shooting star, but that didn't really cover it. Shooting star, she knew, didn't move upward. So she got her husband's attention and said, look at that light. Now, Barney Hill was a 39-year-old postal worker, Marine War veteran. Prided himself on his level-headed thinking. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this was a mixed-race marriage. Barney was black, Betty was white. And that seemed to be something that drew the aliens. Now, he glanced up through the windshield after she pointed out the light and shrugged and dismissed it as a satellite going off course. But as that object grew larger and brighter, even his certainty began to waver. What happened over the next several hours would become the foundation of modern UFO abduction mythology. It would spew countless imitations and forever changed how Americans thought about extraterrestrial contact. On that particular September night, the Hills were simply a middle-aged couple trying to make sense out of something that defied explanation. The landscape through which they traveled was more beautiful and isolated, perfect setting for the bizarre and uncanny. White mountains loomed dark against the star-filled sky. Peaks occasionally illuminated by the moon. All the cars had passed them since leaving Colebrook. Isolation is complete. At Betty's suggestion, they stopped several times to watch this object. They had binoculars. Each viewing made their conventional explanations less plausible. This craft, if that's what it was, moved erratically, changed direction at impossible angles, and stayed silent despite its proximity. With the binoculars, Betty could make out what appeared to be a wingless, cigar-shaped craft with multicolored lights pulsating on its surface. Now, Barney was a skeptic. He was sure it had to be a military aircraft. Their dog Elsie, typically calm, began whining from the back seat. Whether from canine intuition or simply sensing their owner's unbounding anxiety, she curled herself under a tight ball and got into the seat. On a move that would seem both prophetic and foolish, Barney retrieved his .32 caliber pistol from the trunk. And spoke about what threats a handgun might ward off on that particular night, and the .32 especially. Well, the real bizarre activity started when it got close to Indian Head. And the object swung in what Barney described as a perfectly silent arc across the road, however not more than 2 treetops high. Against his better judgment and Betty's protest, Barney got out of the car. And using the binoculars, he could now make out a row of windows wrapping around the crowd. And what he saw in those windows would haunt him for the rest of his life. He saw 10 figures dressed in glossy black uniforms staring back at him. And they were staring with an intensity that definitely disturbed him. And what followed was a 2-hour period that remained blank in their conscious memories until years later, when hypnosis sessions with respected Boston psychiatrist Dr. Benjamin Simon would uncover a narrative so fantastic it strained credibility. But it was supported by unexplainable physical evidence. Betty's dress was torn, his mysterious pink powder, circular marks on their car's trunk, and matching watches that had inexplicably stopped. But when they finally got home at 5 in the morning, both Hills felt profoundly disturbed, but they couldn't articulate why. Somehow they had lost 2 hours, somewhere between Indian Head and Ashland. 35 miles of highway remained a blank in their memories. Now, something had happened on that long stretch of road. Something would take years of psychiatric work to uncover and decades of scientific investigation to analyze. Now, the truth of the matter, if it can be called that, is somewhere between the The stars had been watching in the dark road that had carried him home. The true pointed extraterrestrial visitors and the mysterious mysteries of human consciousness remained a question that would actually still spark debate. For Betty and Barney Hill, that September night marked the beginning of a journey for a stranger to their interrupted vacation. This journey would take them from their quiet New Hampshire life to the center of a worldwide controversy about humanity's place in the cosmos and whether we're truly alone in the universe. Now, Don brought little clarity to his experience. Both felt profoundly unsettled, though neither could fully articulate why. Physical evidence amounted to up in small and troubling ways. Betty's dress bore mysterious tears and strange pink powder. Later, confound laboratory analysis covered everything. Their watches, both reliable timepieces, had stopped working and would never run again. The leather strap of their binoculars was inexplicably broken. And Betty, driven by an impulse she couldn't explain, insisted on leaving their luggage outside and disposing of all the food from their trip. Barney felt an equally inexplicable compulsion to examine his groin area, but he couldn't say why. When he tried to discuss the previous night's events with anybody, their memories seemed to slip away like water through their fingers. There are different approaches to processing the experience would come to define the following months. Betty, unable to contain her curiosity, broke the agreement they'd made with each other to stay silent. She called her sister Janet to discuss the incident. Barney retreated into a state of denial and would persist for years, preferring to push the unsettling memories as far from his consciousness as possible. In the autumn of 1961, the U.S. Air Force was actively collecting UFO reports through Project Blue Book. Well, most officials treated such accounts with barely concealed skepticism. When the Hills finally reported their experience, even out to more fantastic elements, they found themselves speaking with officials who displayed an unusual level of interest in their stories. Walter Webb, a lecturer at Boston's Hayden Planetarium and scientific advisor for the National Investigation Committee on Aerial Phenomena, conducted the first formal investigation. He spent 6 grueling hours interviewing the Hills in October, attempting to catch them in contradiction or inconsistencies. Instead, he found their story ironclad, though he was puzzled by its implications. Next month, Hills endured an 11-hour interview with scientist Robert Holman, C.D. Jackson, Major James McDonnell of the Air Force. During this marathon session, the most troubling aspect of the experience came into sharp focus. What happened to the missing 2 hours? Drive from Colebrook to Portsmouth should have taken 4 hours at most, even accounting for their stops to observe the strange craft. Instead, they arrived home at 5 in the morning. No memory when the additional 2 hours had gone. Well, 10 days after the incident, Betty began experiencing a series of vivid, disturbing dreams that would continue for 5 consecutive nights. Unlike ordinary dreams that fade upon waking, these remained sharp and clear in her memory, compelling her to write down what she was dreaming at the urging of a colleague. In these dreams, she and Barney were taken aboard a craft by small humanoid beings with large eyes and grayish skin. The beings conducted medical examinations, extracted samples, showed her a star map that would become one of the most debated pieces of evidence in UFO history. Well, for his part, Barney found himself increasingly troubled by anxiety and insomnia. Though he hadn't heard the details of Betty's dreams, he began experiencing physical symptoms he couldn't explain, including the development of perfectly circular warts on his groin, precisely where Betty's dreams indicated the aliens had placed examining instruments. Well, finally, in December 1963, the search for answers led to Dr. Benjamin Simon, respected Boston psychiatrist known for his work with military veterans suffering from trauma-induced amnesia. Simon had no particular interest in UFOs or approached their case with professional skepticism and clinical detachment. The psychiatric community in the early 60s was still grappling with questions about the nature of memory and trauma. And hypnosis, while certainly not new, was gaining credibility as a therapeutic tool for its reliability for memory recovery, which was still somewhat controversial, I might add. Dr. Simon's work at the Hills would push the boundaries of both hypnotherapy and scientific understanding of these close encounters. Beginning in January 1964, the Hills began their sessions with Dr. Simon. Every Saturday for 6 months, they'd make the journey to his Boston office, which would be separately hypnotized and questioned about the events of that September night. The tapes from these sessions, 11 hours of recordings, would become some of the most studied evidence of UFO history. What emerged from these sessions are the proof of humanity's first documented contact with extraterrestrial beings, or a fantastic glimpse of the power of the human mind to create and believe its own reality. Simon himself never fully committed to either explanation. Under hypnosis, both Hills recall being taken aboard a craft by beings that would later become iconic in UFO literature. Small humanoids with large wraparound eyes and gray skin. Their accounts, given separately, aligned in uncanny ways and while maintaining distinct perspectives that reflected their different personalities. Betty, characteristically more analytical, provided detailed descriptions of the ship's interior, with the strange equipment in examining rooms. And Barney, who had kept his eyes closed throughout much of the experience, focused on emotional impressions and the being's movements. Both described medical examinations that seemed focused on human reproduction and nervous system function. The most controversial element emerged when Betty described being shown a three-dimensional star map by the being's leader. Years later, amateur astronomer Marjorie Fish would spend hundreds of hours creating three-dimensional models, which suggested the map showed a trading route centered on the Zeta Reticuli star system. Now, Fish's theory would later be challenged by new astronomical data. The very existence of the map raised questions that continue to puzzle researchers today. The Hills, of course, never intended their experience to become public knowledge. In 1965, when a newspaper reporter named John Luttrell obtained recordings from a private church group discussions, the story exploded into public consciousness. The Boston Traveler's sensationalized account forced the Hills to choose between remaining silent while others distorted their story or stepping forward and telling it themselves. Their book, The Interrupted Journey, written by John Fuller and published in 1966, became an instant bestseller. It transformed what had been scattered reports of alien encounters into a coherent narrative that would define how Americans imagined extraterrestrial contact for decades to come. Barney died at the age of 46 of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1969. Betty lived until 2004, became both a celebrity and controversial figure in UFO circles, and she never changed her position from that September night. And her later claims of multiple UFO sightings would strain her credibility with even the most devoted believers. Hill's experience marked a turning point in American relationship with the unknown. Before this, UFO encounters largely involved distant lights or a floating disc. After them, new mythology emerged, with intimate contact with beings whose appearance and actions suggested not just visitation, but study and purpose. Dr. Simon's final assessment remained carefully non-committal. He said something happened to the Hills that night in New Hampshire. Whether it was what they believe or something else entirely is a question that may never be answered to anybody's satisfaction. What is certain is that on that warm September night in 1961, two ordinary people had an extraordinary experience that would reshape American culture's understanding of the possible. The story continues to challenge our assumptions about the nature of reality and memory and humanity's place in the cosmos. In the years since that time, thousands of people have claimed similar experiences. But it provided a combination of physical evidence, psychological depth, and careful documentation that makes the Hills case so unique. Their account stands as both a testament to the mystery of human consciousness and a reminder that maybe we're not alone in the universe at all. Well, from New Hampshire, let's turn to Wiltshire, England. The year is 1964. The location is the small market town of Warminster. And in those last months of '64, that small town of slumbered through its usual routines. Completely unaware, it stood on the precipice of inexplicable events that transformed it from a quiet military outpost into an international focal point for the unexplained. That's within the hills of Wiltshire. The town had long been accustomed to the sounds of war games and military exercises. Nearby Salisbury plain training area readily echoed with artillery fire and the rumble of armored vehicles. The skies above played host to low-flying aircraft on training missions. The local population had grown so accustomed to these martial intrusions they barely paid any attention. The town itself was a study in English provincial life. Streets lined with modest shops and homes, and not changed much since World War II. Garrison's presence provided steady employment and a reliable stream of customers for local businesses. Surrounding farmland sustained generations of agricultural families. Stonehenge was just a short drive away. Ancient stones, drawing tourists who occasionally passed through Warminster streets. But rarely did they linger. The town's most dramatic historical moment had come during the English Civil War when opposing forces clashed in its vicinity. Now, 130 years later, almost about to enter a very different type of notoriety. Transformation began in the pre-dawn hours of Christmas, 1964. While most of England dreamed of presents and pudding, the head lay in her bed listening to something impossible scraping across her roof. This elderly resident had grown familiar with every normal sound a house could make. Settling of tempers in cold weather, the scratching of branches and high winds, and the patter of rain on tiles. Oh, she knew all those sounds. But this was something else entirely. It began subtly at first, until a scratcher reminded her of somebody methodically dragging twigs or holly branches across the roof tiles. Unlike the random pattern of wind-blown vegetation, this noise possessed an unsettling deliberateness, as if something was systematically working its way across every inch of her roof. She sat up in bed, trying to make sense of it. And as she did, the scratching transformed into something more violent, a thunderous pounding that mimicked massive hailstones battering her house. Following her first instinct, moved to the window, expecting to find herself in the midst of a storm. Instead, she found herself looking at an early, still, cloudless sky. Stars shone with clarity, offering no explanation for the noise. Then came the third transformation, a long mechanical hum that grew steadily in intensity until she was forced to cover her ears with its oppressive drone. For several minutes she endured this sonic siege, powerless to do anything but wait for it to end, and when silence did return, it felt heavier, pregnant with implications that rippled through the entire community. Less than a mile away, in a house near Christchurch, Roger O'Rourke was experiencing his own version of this inexplicable assault. Town's postmaster worked late on Christmas Eve, ensuring the last of the holiday deliveries were properly sorted. And now his rest was shattered by what he would later describe as an overwhelming clatter from above, Something invisible was methodically lifting each of the 5,000 tiles on his roof and slamming them back into place. His precision bombardment lasted exactly 1 minute before the transition to the same high-pitched hum that had tormented Mildred's head. And as suddenly as it began, silence. Rupp was a man whose position demanded both respectability and rationality. He found himself in an impossible situation. He knew what he'd heard. The sound had been far too distinct and never to dismiss it. When he ventured outside later that morning to inspect the roof, he didn't see a single tile out of place. The pristine condition of his home seemed to mock the intensity of his experience. He began to wonder if he somehow dreamed of that entire episode. Later, when he learned of other witnesses, he felt confident enough to share his story publicly. Well, the next witness would encounter the phenomenon in the cold light of day, lending credibility to what might otherwise have been dismissed as nocturnal imaginings. By hurried through Westminster's empty streets. She was already late for morning communion service at Christ Church. Town was deserted, shop shuttered for the holiday when she first heard it. It seemed like a distant mocking laugh echoing from the direction of Bell Hill. Some twisted curl, the sound grew louder as it approached Marjorie until she found herself rooted to the spot, assaulted by waves of vibration that seemed to physically press against her head and shoulders. And that pressure was unlike anything she'd ever experienced, not simply sound, but a physical force that threatened to drive her to her knee. And through sheer force of will did she manage to stagger the remaining distance of the church. She was seeking sanctuary from whatever force had chosen this holiday to announce its presence. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. We'll finish talking about Westminster Thing on Monday. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great